a special presentation of LLBN with archaeologists Dr. Lawrence Garrity and Dr. Doug Clark. Excavating the Bible.
Welcome to this edition of Excavating the Bible, What Archaeology Can Teach Us. This program is dedicated to exploring the contributions of archaeology in the Middle East to our understandings of and appreciation for the Bible. I'm Doug Clark, Director of the Center for Near Eastern Archaeology at La Sierra University. And joining me today to talk about the biblical connections with a site in central Jordan, Iraq, Al-Amir, is Dr. Chung Ho Ji, School of Education at La Sierra, and a person who's done a lot of work around Iraq, Al-Amir, and at the site.
At the site as
well. So
5 years minimum.
That's
still ongoing.
And still going. Still going. And Dr. Larry Garrity, President Emeritus of La Sierra and also founding director of Madaba Plains Project, a huge project that's been going for over 40 years. Welcome to both of you here. Let's think about the biblical connections of this site. We'll come and look at the site in a moment, but there is a biblical book and a biblical character primarily who is connected with this site, and then we'll talk about some other characters, non-Israelite, but nevertheless people connected with the story and connected with the site.
That's right. I never thought about my, religious or spiritual life. Nehemiah is going to be the book that I like most. Iraq Al-Amir, the site that we're going to explore today, has a close, actually direct connection with the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah, he was the governor of the Judite, the region in the Persian period in the 5th century and then 4th century, the time span. He came back to Jerusalem 444 BC, and then he rebuilt the Jerusalem wall. And then he faced huge oppositions from his neighbors, 3 major neighbors. So we are focusing one of those neighbors tonight.
Right. And this comes during the time period, the Persian time period, and you talked about the following the time of the, what we call the Great Captivity. And so hopes to rebuild, hopes to get religion and life and the economy and everything back on track again.
In biblical history, the Jerusalem, in other words, the Jerusalem was taken over by the Babylonian armies, was a huge turning point. So before Jerusalem, after Jerusalem, in understanding Israel religion and also the Judah faith, there's a huge differences in many ways. So Nehemiah is actually the starting of the Second Temple period.
Right. In fact, that crisis, a huge crisis that we call the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem and the captivity, basically turned all sensible theology on its head. Because if history, as they were experiencing it, didn't make sense, neither did theology. Everything was gone. And so now Nehemiah is in a position to, reconstruct.
That's right.
And start out with this Second Temple period.
That's right. So not just the wall, probably this is also time with Ezra and then Zerubbabel and other people rebuild why these things happen and what we have to do. So it was kind of a fresh point for them to
a fresh new start.
That's right, fresh new start. Yeah.
So tell us where we are on the map.
Well, here, as you see in the center, there is a Dead Sea, but I have 4 kind of areas. In the middle, the blue one is the area that Nehemiah governed. It's rather small. It's Jerusalem and its vicinity, including Jericho. North, there is a Samaria area under the so-called Sanballat region. And then here is a Geshem, the Arabs. And then east, the yellow circle, that is the Ammonite region. And then that is under the leadership or the rule of Tobias. So these are the 3 major enemies, so-called, put even sometimes war against the Nehemiah. And then they did all kinds of, as many as they can think of, to trick Nehemiah to stop him. And
the reason for that, I mean, they have stayed, for the most part, in the land during this exodus out, during this, what we call the exile to Babylon. So why are these people bothered? Is it because of the competition that this will now create? Is it because of political risks and threats?
This is the time that in the Levant, huge political wind begins to blow in a different direction. In the past, Egypt was under the control of the so-called Mesopotamian power, Babylon and then the Persia. But around this time, Egypt begin to pick up, their kind of own, grip and begin to expand their influence. And then Persia had to stop, that, kind of a intrusion from the south. And then one strategy they decide to, shape is that working with the local, the powers, and then make alliance with them, and then set up a defense, line. So they was kind of competing each other, who's going to be the local, kind of the supreme power. So when they saw that Nehemiah, a new figure, step in, and then creating kind of another competing power, it's limited resources. They just don't want that new person take over what they have been enjoying for some time.
Especially when he arrived with the blessing of the big empire of Persia, right?
That is true.
Yeah.
That was sponsored by the central.
They knew that there was a relationship there that threatened maybe their power.
In fact, correspondence back and forth that illustrated, it seems, one direction at one point and then a kind of a shift in direction. At least that's how it was interpreted by these neighbors. Okay, that's nice.
Yeah.
That's a nice name to use for them. Their neighbors.
And the Persian Empire gives lots of autonomies, to these local powers to do whatever they want to do. So in many ways, it's kind of laissez-faire. They just let them, sort out their own troubles as long as they stay in their tent and camp. So that was happening in the book of Nehemiah, and then all those hostilities.
And so here are the neighbors. You mentioned them: Sanballat of Samaria, Geshem of what we would call the Negev, or the northern Sinai.
Yeah. So archaeologically, all those three figures were very well evidenced and supported. But especially the last one, Tobias, is probably the one that has a richest archaeological kind of the data and then back up to understand who they were and what they did and how long they stayed in their kind of a power position.
And so we have now this competition. Tobiah is the one who stands out in the story.
Yeah, that's
Actually,
right.
all of them are mentioned,
In him.
but Tobiah stands out. And of course, archaeologically, Tobiah stands out,
That's right.
as we'll see in a
Not just archaeologically, even in the book of Nehemiah, Geshem and then Sanballat, they appeared with Tobias, but they disappear in the middle of the book. It is only Tobiah who stayed all the way to the end. Nehemiah, to him, it is the only, the local power that is associated with the Jerusalem temple. So it was not just military political competition, something involved temple politics as well. So even in the book of Nehemiah, Tobiah was very tenacious and easily do not disappear from the scene.
Based on his name, Tobiah, it sounds like a Yahwistic name, or a Hebrew name that has the same God that the Hebrews had. So that's another reason for the similarity, maybe.
That's right. Tobiah means that the Yahweh is good. Of course, regarding where the name originates, there's some debate going on. Even some scholars say that that name is mentioned, Lachish Astrakhan, but that is something, still not many people, buy. But also some other people say that they might be one of those local people, residents, stayed in Jerusalem, or some of them taken to the Babylon. But it is not sure. But apparently the name includes some sort of Yahwehist, kind of the Judaic components. But what I actually learned as I do my research in the Al-Amir area, we see some sort of non-traditional, non-kind of the conventional faith of the religious practice. For example, it involves lots of columbarium, that means a dove, was raised, not just probably for the consumption, but also some of the religious purposes.
And a columbarium looks like what?
It is kind of a stones or the wall made kind of triangle, kind of niches, and then those, for the doves.
For the doves to nest in.
That's right. Especially even in nowadays in Jordan, you see many of those in the desert, but not kind of a permanent structures with the caves. But in Al-Amir, it is very distinctive, part of the architecture in the area. And also in the Al-Amir in the vicinity, you see the rocks that has a serpent motif and shape. So even though Tobias, that includes Yahweh's worship, but probably he was not one of those traditional ones. He is a very good example of so-called Hellenization or Hellenizer.
So the syncretism has taken place.
Yeah. So probably the conflict between Nehemiah, who wants to uphold the pure Yahwistic kind of a belief, it is inevitable for him to conflict or go against with Tobias, who was bringing in, some other different, or the alien or the foreign kind of components of religious
And you're
faith.
talking about Hellenistic. What does that word mean? And what time period does it represent?
Hellenistic is kind of right after the Persian period. So it is 330, BC down to the 136, BC. So it's about 300 to 350 years span.
Between the Persians and the Romans.
Roman period, that's
when
right.
the Greek influence
Right.
was
That's right.
paramount.
So intertestamental period. But Tobiah has interesting and important implications to understand intertestamental period, because without understanding Hellenistic period, oftentimes we have difficulties reading even New Testament, why this thing happened, why these things go in this way. So I think the foundation was laid during this period, and then Tobias played very critical roles in shaping those politics and religious faith.
And I think it was the pressure that Tobiah, and maybe the others too, but I think it was primarily Tobiah, was putting on Nehemiah and was sending threats and so on. And this is when he responds and saying, I can't come down and talk to you, because they had arranged some kind of meeting away from Jerusalem, and he smelled it out very quickly
That's right.
as a trap. And he says, no, I don't have time to go with you. I'm too busy doing the good work of rebuilding these walls, which I think took, at least according to the record, about, 52 days or something? Now, this had to have been a quick fix
Repair, right.
of the walls, but nonetheless, did it quickly, and he was not going to be snookered out into
That's
the countryside.
Right. The threat from Tobiah was real, so that Nehemiah took it very seriously, and he tried to do his best as quickly as possible, because the completion of the Jerusalem wall was not just for Jewish people, but in relation to his enemies. It was a very important, critical matter for him to complete.
Right. Okay, there we are in the Hellenistic period. You have some other sources here. Say something about these.
That's right. The book of Nehemiah, Tobiah is a very prominent figure, but if we look at the extra biblical sources like the Zenon Papyri or the Josephus history books, he is a very prominent figure, especially from 3rd century, 2nd century BC. We have lots of stories, especially in his Josephus book. We know that Tobiah was the prominent, most powerful political party. Not just political sense, but also it was collecting tax. In the ancient time, tax collection means you have actually everything. And he has a very close ties with the Ptolemaic dynasty in Alexandria. And it was not just the one figure, it was from one generation to another generation. So we know Tobiah has been very dominant political group almost for 300 years in Jerusalem. So he's well into the Hellenistic period, and that side of story is from Josephus, and then other, the papyrus, like Zenon Papyri, other sources.
Right. So we are far into the Hellenistic period.
That is right.
When we're talking about the...
And the Zenon Papyri came from Egypt, didn't they?
That's right.
So that demonstrates the Egyptian sort of influence over this part of the world at that time.
That's right. Well, we should not be more technical, but the Hellenistic period is generally divided into two periods, early Hellenistic, late Hellenistic. That is about 200, 198 BC. That is the dividing point. Early Hellenistic dominated by Egyptian side,
Right.
okay, and then later part is the more from Syria. This battle was very critical, and then it was very real. So even the book of Daniel, chapter 13, uses that motive to explain the great controversies or the the future events. So we actually talking about here, Zenon Papyri was dealing with the first Hellenistic period, and then this particular document shows that it was not just the late Hellenistic period, but also even the 3rd century BC. We don't know that much about Transjordan, but now we're building up the archaeological evidence to understand that period. Those periods, 3rd century BC, Tobiah was the most powerful figure in Transjordan.
Now, I really appreciate this kind of background, and what it tells us is that when we read about Nehemiah or Tobiah, there's a whole context. There's a political context. There's historical. There's chronological. There is economic. All of this context. And it seems to me that archaeology contributes to understanding that context. So we actually, when we then sit down and read the book of Nehemiah, we have that context in our mind. It's so much easier to put the pieces together.
That's right. The Bible is not just maybe about the faith, because our faith evolves in our life, and then in relation to others, and then the world that we're engaging in. That was not just for us, that was also the case in the past. And then Tobias and Nehemiah was some of the showcase again, showing that how political world, economic world interwoven with the religious, the faith.
And what you've just said is another way of saying how important archaeology is to create the context for the biblical story. You can read the story all by itself, but you don't understand it nearly as well if you don't understand the history, the geography, the discoveries of archaeology that help bring that story to life.
I agree definitely with that. And then Tobias' case is one of the example. Without archaeology, it is very difficult to understand what was really going on.
And we have on this slide some of the rest of the cast of characters involved in the story. So who are these people?
This is actually one of the son that the Tobias, the name, his name is Hyrcanus. He is Joseph's son. Joseph is one of the Tobias who has that close relations with Alexander, the Egyptian, the Greek power. And then there's an interesting story about this, man. He was the youngest son of the Joseph, and then he was also most beloved son by the father. But his brother, from different mother, didn't like him. So there were huge conflict and war between those, and then Hyrcanus killed one of his brother, and he has to run away from Jerusalem. And then Josephus says that this young Tobias left Jerusalem and went back to the original place of the Tobias. And then he built Kasser, or the huge fort. We don't know exactly what was the function of that, but Joseph called it fort or fortress. And then he also lived in caves, and then he kind of thrived for the time being until political wind shifts from Egypt to Syria.
So let's try to take a look at these, especially those two things you talked about, the kasser, the castle, the fortress, the palace, whatever it really was, and then the caves.
Yeah, so let's look at the real kind of the world, the historical kind of world of the Tobias. And this satellite map shows that the Al-Amir is right here, so it shows where it is situated in relation to Jerusalem and then Amman. And then this is the heart of the Al-Amir, the estate of the Tobias. This is the wadi, or the valley called Wadi Asir, the perennial, the richest kind of place in terms of the water. In that valley, three main remains are visible. One is the village site, which is called Al-Amir. And then number two is one of the major, probably the most famous building in Transjordan, which is called Qasr al-Abud. That means the building, the palace of the servant was slave. And then number three is on the cliff, there is a cave complex, more than 15 caves that were found there. And they have a very different functions from one another, but two of them are most famous because of the inscriptions that we know, Tobias.
Right over the entrance, right, to the
That's
caves.
right, two of those. And this is the view, and then you see that this building in the center, this is a Qasr al-Abud. Hyrcanus, the Tobias, to build this building, he dug this pond. So this is kind of a little pond, and he made an island. And then you see the support around there, and there is a little kind of path, narrow way leading to this. So this is Qasr al-Abud in the Al-Amir, and then this is the valley of Wadi Asir.
Wadi Asir, and it goes down to the Jordan Valley and to the Dead Sea.
That's right. It flows to here and then converges with the Wadi Kafrain, and then this is what Jordan Valley.
And the caves that we'll also see are off to the right of this.
That's right, on this side. So this photo is actually to the east of the caves, but the cave complex is right next. So this is the front view, the building, Qasr al-Abud. This is the entrance. This is a bit old photo.
Excuse me, Abid is the word for servant.
Servant, slave. Yeah. So this is the bit old photo, but this is the view from the front. And then this is the entrance. You see the two columns. And then this is the view from inside the entrance toward the hills of the Al-Amir.
And it's a beautiful setting.
Very nice.
The Wadi Asir it's green, it's
Very
always
green.
verdant.
That's right.
And the water is always flowing.
Especially in the springtime.
Yeah.
You don't know how beautiful that place is. And the flowers. So this is one of those kind of small paradise in the desert.
Right, right.
This is the inside interior of the Qasr al-Abd.
And looking toward the...
Toward the, actually this is toward the south.
Toward the backside, toward the south.
So there are two, those. And this is the facade of this building. And then you see the water fountain, which is with the lion. And then, pandas. So this is kind of a small monumental building that has lots of architecture and symbolic. Apparently, whoever built this building was dreaming paradise in the middle of the land.
Well, and there's at least one of the lion figures that either is confused or the artist is confused or there's another message, and that is it's a male lion with the mane, you can see it, but it is suckling kittens. So somebody didn't get all of that straight.
I think this is mystical in many ways.
This is paradise.
This is paradise, and paradise, not everything is clear as we want. This is the Tobias table, complex, and then it's actually two-tier. As you see, the second layer up there, and then this is the lower terrace, and then it works from here all the way to the end, and then at the end of this cave complex. There is a huge room which is now covered with the stones. It's a columbarium room. Three size is hundreds of triangle niches there. And then on to the other side, there's a huge stone. It's a columbarium. Right. On both sides, there's two columbarium rooms of installations. In the middle, two terraces of the caves. And actually this was used by the Tobias.
And the columbariums, another name could be dovecots?
That's
where
the
the doves are. Yeah.
And then this is those two caves in the cave complex. And then you see that the word Tobiah. So we call it Tobiah inscription caves. This is one of those in the east side.
Now that inscription is later than the Tobiah of Nehemiah's time, is that right?
This is actually debatable, and everyone agrees what these letters stand for.
Right.
In terms of date, it ranges from 4th century BC to 2nd century BC. So there's no agreement. This is Aramaic, the letters. So it is difficult to date.
Right.
This is the western Tobias caves. 1998, with the Department of Antiquities, I excavated these two caves about for 3-week period. This western cave, nothing really much remained. It was almost completely cleared by the Byzantine the people. But the eastern cave, we had about a 3 feet kind of deposit. And the first about 1 feet was a silt from the modern or the recent years. But below that silt layer, we had about 6 different strata, from Middle Islamic, Mamlukian period, all the way down to the Hellenistic, early Roman. The evidence from the earliest period was not really strong, so that was one of the data that we still need to put together. But it shows that the cave has been used for multi-period, especially beginning with probably late Hellenistic or early Roman period. But you remember that Josephus says Hyrcanus came back to this estate and he built or he carved caves. So archaeologically we don't have strong evidence as yet to support it, but at least it's not conflict with what we read in the book of Josephus. And then this is one of the Rosenbergs, one of the scholars who studied Al-Amir, kind of an imaginary kind of the drawing how the cave was used, and then he says this is probably ceremonial, kind of the small courtyard.
And this would be to commemorate the tribal leaders, or what sort of function would this serve?
If you sit in one of the entrance of these caves, you see that this panoramic view of the valley. Even this is a hot summer, you have a breeze. This with a scenic view, this is a perfect place for you to invite your friends and leaders and talk about immediate concerns or some of the political bargains. And also this could be the place for party, Cave has really very various features, and this seems to be one of those cave with a front courtyard, and you can sit there, and then you enjoy the views at your left.
Multi-purpose.
It is definitely.
Right.
And then this is actually the drawing that, according to my study, the territory, the size of the Tobias territory. Iraq Al-Amir is at the center, and then this red line shows that the potential road system that connects Iraq Al-Amir to the Ramah, one of the most important city in the Jordan Valley, and then there's a crossing to Jericho. And then this territory is actually much bigger than some scholars thought in the past. The reason that I'm expanding the size of Tobias territory is because of my research in Hebet al-Mahata, which is Madhva Plains project site in Heshbon, the survey. This site and then another site called Hebet al-Sur that was studied by myself and then Mohammed Wahib, the Jordanian archaeologist. There is a lot of similarity between these two and a strong evidence from this particular period. So this map shows that Tobiah was not just a small local kind of a political figure. He was a major player, a political military player.
And you have taken seriously how communication took place between these sites. It's not just the territory, but people were moving back, and you've spent some time working on these roads.
Ancient people like us, they need to move and they need to trade. They need to they just don't go, randomly. The road system is surprisingly conservative and is persistent. It doesn't easily change. And then this road, through my survey, was dotted with ancient sites, ancient, the watchtowers or the villages. And this is probably the shortest shortest route for people to travel from the Iraq Al-Amir to the Jordan Valley.
And then one quick look here.
This is Hebet al-Mahata, one of those. If we read the Josephus or the ancient records, Tobiah has a huge military, the cavalrymen and also the garrisons. And this seems to be one of those cities that is mentioned or in the mind of those ancient writers. This is the citadel of the Hebet al-Mahata.
Excellent. And one word about this.
This is a small object. This is so-called Rhodian stamp, jar. It is very interesting. This is very common in the Middle East, but this originates from the city-state called Rhodes in the Mediterranean. That little city was famous for the emporium, and then this shows that Iraq Al-Amir was connected with Mediterranean economic trade.
Thank you, Chang-Ho. And thank you, Larry. And thank all of you for joining us for this edition of Excavating the Bible, What Archaeology Can Teach Us. We hope we've added to your information. We look forward to next time. Until then, think ancient, keep believing, and keep exploring. For Excavating the Bible, I'm Doug Clark.